This be like us is over. This be like us or become like us is over. And that's what the Americans cannot understand. They still believe that they have to lead, that the world must be led by the Americans. And the reason they can't see it and they're in denial is that it's going down. Not the US as a state or a society, but as an empire. And all empires go down.
What we just saw in the 2024 American presidential debate between President Biden and former President Donald Trump is simply reflective or emblematic of the decline of the American empire.
The only person on this stage is a convicted felon, this man I'm looking at right now. But he could be a convicted felon as soon as he gets out of office.
It was perhaps one of the most embarrassing and childish debates anyone has ever witnessed in American politics. It was filled with mudslinging and childish retorts and immature accusations.
Having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant. What are you talking about? You live the morals of an alley cat. Take an answer. I didn't have sex with a porn star.
I left the debate with my memory filled of who's a better golfer.
And by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it? That's the biggest lie. He's a 6 handicap of all. I was an 8 handicap. Yeah. 8? But I had, you know how many... I've seen you swing, I know you swing. Hey, let's not act like children. President Trump, we're going to... Let's not act like children. You are a child.
Or who had sex with a prostitute. And none of the major issues that were plaguing the American public's minds of immigration, of the economy and inflation were properly addressed. None of the facts stated by either candidate were convincing at all. And I must say that the enemies of America, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, must be looking at this and saying, we don't have to do much. America is collapsing on its own. I'm going to sit behind my defense line in Ukraine. I'm going to keep my proxy underground in Gaza and simply watch America bankrupt itself, trying to fund these unwinnable wars. But one of the things I think stood out from watching that debate is the extent to which the Western media, ruled by the elites of the deep state or the globalists, have engaged in nothing but cover-ups, lying, and propaganda for the past few years. And as the saying goes, a lie reaches halfway around the world before the truth puts on its laces. And now the truth has its shoes on and it's imploding in everyone's faces. For the longest while, I have said that Biden is a walking disaster. He's a cadaver. I made a video about it months ago, chronicling all of his gaffes. In fact, it was based on an article, I believe, from the Telegraph, where it said that Biden is the self-proclaimed gaffe machine. It did not get a lot of views. It did not get a lot of impressions on YouTube. Clearly, no one needs to ask the question why. YouTube is now a very censored platform. But I knew this a long time ago, and I've seen countless videos on social media. Biden in meetings with foreign ministers and foreign politicians, embarrassing America, losing his train of thought, rambling some totally incredible things before saying anyway and coming back to reality.
I was just thanking, anyway, I started off without you. And I sold a lot of state secrets and a lot of very important things that we shared.
But if you said that, you were considered to be a right-wing propagandist or a Putin apologist. So they hid it. The Western liberal media hid Biden's decline as much as they could. And then they set him up for this debate. They cleared his schedule a week before. They had a rigorous training session. But the truth then came and slapped everyone in their face. And we saw how bad Biden's mental decline is. But for me watching the debate, I actually left with it and said, it wasn't that bad. But that's because I've been desensitized to Biden's gaffes. I actually thought by Biden's standards, that debate wasn't that bad. But for many Americans and people in the West and onlookers who haven't seen what I have seen, they were in shock by what they saw. It certainly didn't shock me. But I want to talk a bit about that point, about America decline being covered up by the mainstream media. That is the same strategy we saw in Ukraine. That's perhaps the whole purpose of my channel, to unveil the media propaganda about the Ukraine war and the Israel war. In Ukraine, we heard all in 2022 how inept, how stupid, how poorly planned the Russian invasion was.
Хотілося запитати, яке в середньостатистичного кацапа спорядження і наскільки гірше воно від нашого?
Хто сказав, що воно гірше? Арестовича переслухав.
Ну просто таке враження склалось в більших, ніби вони з ржавими АК
Це
стріляють.
дивіться,
і
телемарафон
страйкбольних.
просто вдома треба вимкнути. І далі все піде, якась реальність буде вливатися в маси.
Так, а можна
мозок.
я скажу? От я от прям захотів,
Опа.
знаєте.
Да.
Підтримаємо! Давайте! А я тобі скажу, що російська армія нічим не гірша української, навіть краще. Технологічно оснащеніша, раз. Більше техніки, два. Краща зброя, краще спорядження, ніж української. Що ви взяли, що вони гірші? Це, знаєте, навіть ніби приниження якесь виходить наше. Типа, хулі ви воюєте з лохами.
Ну да.
І нічого не можете зробити. А воно ж тому, що вони сильніші.
2
нас.
года
Це
уже.
об'єктивно. І мають краще спорядження, і кращі державні програми по спорядженню і забезпеченню армії. І не треба недооцінювати противника. Це дуже серйозний противник. Серйозніший, ніж більшість армій світу.
We were led to believe that Ukraine was on the brink of victory when they did their counteroffensives in Kharkiv and Kherson, and I've made detailed videos about them. But in reality, those counteroffensives have brought Ukraine to closer to its defeat than victory.
Pourquoi les Américains disent que l'offensive fonctionne? Parce que eux ont besoin de rassurer les Ukrainiens en disant c'est bien, continuez, allez-y. Mais c'est un massacre. Je veux dire que les Ukrainiens, ils ont des pertes incroyables en matériel, en hommes.
Ukraine is several times smaller than Russia. Population is 3 or 4 times smaller than Russia. Defense industry, military industrial complex, wealth, resources, everything is multiple times smaller than Russia. And in most wars, when it's one-sided in terms of the size of the army and their resources and their resource base, the smaller army knows that it cannot get involved in an attrition war toe-to-toe with a larger army. So they retreat, they do guerrilla attacks, they try to stretch out the war until perhaps the people at home in the bigger country protest against it or they get fed up.
What the West is trying to do is that Ukraine is a much smaller force than Russia has available, and therefore if it gets dragged into this attritional warfare, the bigger force will win. The Goliath will prevail over the David. Russia will prevail over Ukraine.
And they come to the negotiation table. That's what Vietnam did to the bigger force of the USA. Russia invades Ukraine. Russia is by far the bigger force, and yet it is Ukraine who has decided to go on the offensive 3 times. And that is because, my friends, of media propaganda promulgated by President Zelensky and probably influenced by the Washington administration. After pumping Ukraine with billions of dollars, after there was a peace deal that could have ended this in 2022, and they told Ukraine, fight on. Boris Johnson flew to Ukraine and said, you can fight on, we will give you the weapons. Russia is weak, we have a chance to defeat Russia. And put so much propaganda in his head that he believed the hype that the Russians were weak and incompetent and inept, and therefore we can launch an offensive, and they would either flee or capitulate. And as the saying goes, never interrupt an enemy when he's making a mistake. And the Russians actually induced them to launch these offensives in Kharkiv and Kherson. And they ran through $40 billion of equipment in maybe a month and a half.